This is California City, California, a city with almost nothing. It's simply unpaved roads that create giant subdivisions. Every once in a while, you'll see a house or two on random parcels in these lands in these neighborhoods, but it looks extremely strange and off-putting when it comes to city planning. This is what I call a fake city in this case, and it's one of likely hundreds across the country of towns that were created completely as scams, and they now look like they've been bombed or something. Today, I'll take you through their insane histories, which takes a deeper dive into the history of American cities than you might think. Quickly before we get into that though, please consider subscribing to the channel. We make geography and city content every week, and I'm trying to grow the channel. So any subscriber helps me out. It's easy for you and it's helpful for me. Thank you. So looking at the development patterns of the entire country, there's one region to focus on here, and that's the Sun Belt. See, World War II really breaks development in half, with economic conditions and population in the US obviously seeing some oddities in this time period. But after the war, there was a boom in America's urban planning and development, whether this be because of that or simply because of new innovations in the time period. Either way, the air conditioning was developed and widely distributed, which meant the Sun Belt, which was previously way too hot during the summer, became a perfect paradise year-round, and population began shifting and new people moved to these areas. As suburbs began appearing out of nowhere, we noticed developers are the obvious ones to focus on here since they had the most to gain from it. A phenomenon then formed, and conditions were perfect for a problem. There was a ton of land that was easy to acquire, and there was a ton of demand as well. Especially in two areas, the massive desert and the massive swamp. The land wasn't crazy habitable, but nobody cared if developers acquired 10,000 acres. And what happened there is where problems arose. So I'll take you example by example to illustrate that. Let's start with Rio Rancho, New Mexico, a suburb of Albuquerque. You notice that off to the west of the city are these really strange, almost abandoned, unpaved roads, which is the best way to tell you it was a land scam. This all ends up being similar city by city, but in Rio Rancho's case, the 1960s real estate corporation bought 55,000 acres west of Albuquerque and founded Rio Rancho Estates, which aimed to be a master planned community. They first had to plat out the entire area, which just means drawing a road map, and that's all it took. They then advertised to people in the Rust Belt and northern cities, promising paradise, water, street, and utilities. Sometimes this was even by mail straight to people's houses. They could buy 1 acre for extremely cheap prices and move to what was said to be paradise. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Rio Rancho, but I wouldn't exactly call it paradise, so that would be problem number 1. Problem 2, though, what we see today is exactly what they saw then, and that's a whole lot of nothing. Thousands of people bought land, but they lied about utility and roads, so only the most desperate people actually used the land and built homes, which is why we see this strange development pattern with some parcels developed and others not. Now, straying off the normal story of these land scam cities, Rio Rancho has modern day problems that I find fascinating related to this. Because the city is confined by this empty grid of nothing, developers would acquire land using eminent domain, which is basically the government taking it and paying what they deem to be a reasonable price, in this case for a new subdivision. With the neighborhood of Cabazon, it was difficult to do this even with the government's help, since they had trouble contacting all the owners to tell them their land was being acquired. But it gets crazier. This didn't fully go over well, and a law was actually passed around 2007 that banned the use of eminent domain by developers simply searching for areas to construct their subdivisions. It was said that this wasn't actually for the common good and instead just for the developers. This means to use any of the land known as Rio Rancho Estates west of the city, they would need to individually buy land from each landowner, and since they don't really live there, it's basically impossible to track them down and make that happen. This means Rio Rancho has accidentally totally ruined their development, limiting where they can expand to a very small area. While this was going on, Florida has its own land scams going on. Going way back, a railroad was being built down the east coast of Florida, and Congress passed the Swamp and Overflowed Lands Act of 1850, granting the state millions of acres of swampland to use how they please. Florida used this to pay people for building the railroad by giving them an absurd amount of land per small distance of railroad. This wasn't immediately bad, but flash forward to the 50s and 60s when Florida's population exploded, these swampy, seemingly undevelopable lands sounded like perfect opportunities to develop land. My favorite ones that I can't talk about enough would be Port Charlotte, Northport, and Lehigh Acres. Starting up here, these swampy lands were pre-platted, and sales were made by mail, most of the time without even seeing their parcel. Some houses were built, although it's still pretty ugly, but one of my favorite neighborhoods in America is this one in Northport. There are no buildings and roads are totally overgrown, now apparently being used extensively for drug deals. Lehigh Acres didn't even try with the weird suburban shape. They just gridded out 135,000 residential lots of swamp and sold them parcel by parcel. This one kind of worked though, because it has a population of 114,000 now. Another crazy one in Florida is Wakulla Gardens, up near Tallahassee, a very small little overplatted scam town. In this case, there was never actually any intention for it to be built by developers, and these small lots were simply sold at state fairs. When people arrived, many of their lots were flooded, and it struggled specifically with environmental concerns. Present day, it's way too far gone, with a full repair of this community estimated to cost around $34 million, making it very much not worth the money. A large city that has a ton of these would be El Paso, Texas. You see this design east of the city, and it was the same scam put in place everywhere else. A map was shown with future roads and water lines, but when people moved there, it looked nothing like the map. I mean, see for yourself. You see how it looks on the map? Well, this is what it looks like in real life. Yeah, it's nothing even remotely similar, I know. Also, what is this subdivision design? What in the world are we thinking, guys? Even if there were actually buildings here, I would still hate it. It seems like the ghost town idea was more prevalent in the West, where it was a desolate desert. You can technically build in a lot of these Florida swamps, and we know that the whole state exploded in population, so other land scams like Cape Coral actually worked out perfectly fine. They started out overplatted, but because of the extreme growth, they just slowly filled it out, and it was totally fine in the end. Genuinely, a good portion of Florida City started out this way, and since it's all people did back in the 50s and 60s when the population started booming, they got away with it. Moving back out west, though, there are a couple more unique situations I wanted to mention. Obviously, you have the previously mentioned California City, which was planned to be the new northern Los Angeles metropolis. It was projected to room 400,000 residents. And this wasn't as much of a scam as it was just overall bad planning. They built the roads, but the demand for the city was just so far under what they expected that it looks incredibly stupid present day. Maybe it has something to do with the location in the center of a desert and fairly close to Death Valley. Next, there's one Mountain West example of this, which is Colorado City, Colorado. It was created to be a mountainside resort town with golf and swimming pools and other cool stuff, but it has that same undeveloped road layout, with most of the town having nothing. This one actually really confuses me because I couldn't find any info on why nobody developed here. It seems like a prime location near the mountains, but for whatever reason, it still lies mostly undeveloped. So comment down below if you know. Finally, we moved to Hawaii, which had its own problems with false advertising, pre-platted scam communities. The state is beautiful and feels foreign to many mainlanders, so it's easy to advertise paradise to people who have no idea what they're getting into, especially on the Big Island. Ocean View is one of my favorites, being genuinely one of the craziest communities in the country. 10,500 acres of land were bought out, and a very strange grid design was pasted all the way up the mountain with thousands of feet between the top and the bottom. Look at this map for a second and tell me how you actually drive from the bottom to the top. I guess you do something like this, but it would just be stupid overall. Anyways, again, they sold them plot by plot to mainlanders who bought them and didn't know much about this land and what it looked like. Look around. This is actually a volcanic wasteland at times, and it's not really fit for any form of development in a lot of places. There's some houses all over, but most of it just laid empty and insanely weird. There's also Mountain View, which is a little less strange, but then Hawaiian Paradise Park and Hawaiian Acres. Paradise Park actually kind of worked, but talk about pandering to get people to move there with that name. Hawaiian Acres is just like Lehigh Acres, Florida, in that it's just a forested grid with a few houses here and there. But it's mostly just weird and empty. These continued throughout the country, but it's one of the strangest aspects of city development in our nation's history. It's also important to mention that a lot of the people that orchestrated these land scams did end up getting in trouble for them. There's more where this came from, with today's cities simply being examples of what can be seen if you look deep into our country. Thanks for watching. Thank you to the members this week: Devin, the D, Alan, Cal B, Dane Ryan, Corey Howard, Five-Toed Sloth Bear, Aiden, Chris Rose, Andres Quintero, Hudson Valley Drones, Why Life is For, Cranberry, Javier Campos, Devontae, Underpass Music Official, The Autistic City Scouts Fan, Florida Jake, RFP, Subrail Fanning, Dutch Vanderlyn, James Cermak, Rob R, Big Pasty, Jameson Headley, Colonel Potter, Eric Hare, Sir JC17, Jerome McCall, The Baked Fruit, Jesse Cook, Jalen Rigo, Alexander Lichko, Lorda Halliday, Charles Watson, The Happy Hode, Grant Dickerson, Midwest Rail Fan, Mick Kastner, D. Stephen Phillips, CJ Brick, Resident Contrarian, Hazev the Wolf, Brock Sanders, Stephen Priestman, SB Wilder, Makita Marshanoff, Kern Ainsley, KMS162, Bryson, Rosewood 4, Darkbird, Snyder Schwein, and Ryan Devins.